Thank you for joining our alumni career panel. My name is Sean Kelly, and I'm the new Assistant Director of Career Advising here at the School of Public Health at Brown. Today, we're joined by recent alumni from our AB, MPH, MPH, and SCM and Biostatistics programs, and I look forward to introducing them all to you momentarily. Our goal for this discussion is to be as interactive as possible. So in addition to the questions we received in advance during registration, we encourage you to take advantage of the Q&A feature in this webinar. It's the button at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible and welcome online questions after the panel to sph-careers@brown.edu, and I'll follow up with you shortly. We'll also be recording this webinar and sharing it on our website for future reference. And so we encourage you to check it out later. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our panelists in alphabetical order. It happens to be the same order, both by first and last name. Not planned, but pretty cool that happened. And so we'll start with Alex Adia. Alex graduated with his AB in Public Health in 2018 and his MPH in 2019. While at Brown, he published more than 20 papers with faculty and other students and won the Graduate School's Award for Outstanding Academic Accomplishment. He works in life sciences consulting at PRECISIONadvisors and is based out of Queens, New York. Welcome, Alex. Chantal Lewis. Chantal was born and spent her early life in Jamaica. She completed her bachelor's degree in biology at Johns Hopkins and soon pursued a master's of public health at Brown University. Her academic and career path has helped her to explore the vast field of public health policy, planning, and program evaluation. She's worn different hats as a CDC Foundation epidemiologist for the Rhode Island Department of Health and is currently a project coordinator at Brown's Center for Gerontology and Healthcare Research. Welcome, Chantal. Charden Virgil. Charden is a 2017 graduate of the Brown University MPH program. Prior to coming in to Brown, Ms. Virgil completed her undergraduate studies at Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi. As a consultant at Ankura Consulting Group, Charden's work primarily focuses on devising strategies for health systems to mitigate risk, as well as evaluating compliance to Medicare provider-based department regulations. Lastly, we have Khalil Zlaoui. Khalil is a data scientist at CVS Aetna with a background in applied mathematics and biostatistics. At CVS, Khalil does evaluation of care management programs and products. Most of Khalil's work involves statistics and machine learning for causal inference. So welcome to everyone. We're so excited to have you joining us today. We really appreciate the time you're taking to share with our students and alumni your important perspectives about navigating the job search process. And so let's get started with a question for everyone, followed by pre-submitted questions and then Q&A submissions from our attendees. So for everyone in the same order, alphabetically, what do you like most about your current job? And what would you say was your biggest learning experience since you graduated from Brown? So we'll start with Alex.
All right. Hi, everyone. So like Sean mentioned, I'm in life sciences consulting, which is just the way that people try to hide the fact that they work in pharmaceuticals. That's the polite way to say it, right? So I got to say that the thing that I like the most and the primary reason why I decided to move into life sciences consulting following academia is that I think there's a lot of information and decision making when it applies to pharmaceuticals that you don't necessarily get from an academic environment. And, you know, of course, things like pharmacoepidemiology, things like that are really nice to know. Being able to get like a hands-on view, especially given that my path at Brown had been very heavily academic, was something that I really enjoyed. The thing that's been the biggest learning experience is obviously in academia, you have a lot of time to marinate with the information, think about it, you know, produce outputs. In consulting, it moves a lot quicker and you often have to make decisions that are not necessarily the ones that are most confirmed, and you just have to kind of go with the best information available rather than being able to have an answer that you're 100% confident in. And I think that that's been something that I've had to adjust to, but has ultimately been a really refreshing thing to add to my skill set.
Great, thank you. Chantal?
So as Sean mentioned, I'm currently a project coordinator with the Center of Gerontology at Brown. And I think one of the best part of my job is that there's an emphasis on evidence-based research. And I think that's something that I really enjoy being a part of. Like everything that we're doing is kind of steeped into the research that's out there for Alzheimer's and dementia. In terms of like what I learn, one of the things that I learned from being in my job, I think there's so many people that come to the table. I'm surrounded by a lot of people who are smarter than me, so I cannot help but learn. And it's a great experience. It keeps me on top of my game. And you just kind of are surrounded by so much excellence that you can't help but to kind of absorb a little bit of that. So
love that. Thank you. Charden?
Hello, everyone. As Sean mentioned, my name is Charden Virgil, and I'm a senior associate with, or at rather, Ankura Consulting Group. And I think the thing that I like the most about what I'm currently doing is that I really do get a chance to work on policy and really sort of help hospitals and health systems at large just, try to better be in compliance with some of these federal regulations. And so I really do enjoy that. Similar to what Chantal said, I work with, well, one of the biggest things that I learned was that, honestly, being very frank here, I didn't know too much about consulting before I got into it. So that was one of the biggest things I've sort of learned about how it works. And so many people, as Chantal said, are working at the table with me. It's really interesting. So I get to work with a lot of different people. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. And I definitely look forward to hearing more about your motivations for pursuing consulting, because now is the time to start applying to consulting internships and jobs. And so I look forward to hearing both of your perspectives about that. Great. And Khalil.
So hi, everyone. I'm Khalil. I'm a senior data scientist at CVS and Aetna. I would say that what I like most about my job is that we have a lot of data, so it's kind of up to the promise that we can do data science, because with not too much data, you can't really do data science. I also like that what we try to do is improve our members' health. So it's sort of like data science for good. And I also like that we use, in my particular team, we use a lot of causal inference, and we try to explain phenomenon. So it's very much in line with my expectations when I was looking for a job. To me, what's been a learning curve was really how to communicate statistics and data science-based results to non-quantitative people in the company. So that's been really challenging. And I think I've really worked on my communication skills in the past year and a half with CVS Aetna.
Great, thanks everyone. And again, welcome. We're so excited to have you here for anyone joining us right now. So we'll kind of dive into our pre-registration questions for everyone. This was a common one that a few people asked. And so as someone who's a non-pre-med public health concentrator, I don't really have a solid understanding of what my options are post-public health concentration or majoring. And so if it's not medicine or clinical research or epidemiology, can you maybe share some insight about what opportunities are available to those studying public health? So what are your peers doing? It would be helpful to share some insight. So maybe we'll go back to the beginning. Maybe the first two panelists can share their insight. So Alex, if you don't mind, and Chantal.
Yeah, sure. So I can give you an insight into some of my classmates who are also into the ABMPH program and what they're doing. So my roommate, one of my close friends, Spencer Anderson, he ended up working for a public, it's like a nonprofit financial firm that, again, I'm going to probably butcher what he's doing, but essentially it's trying to give housing loans and be like, it's like a nonprofit that tries to do that in the community. So he does that. One of my other close friends, Katie Arona, she's in Rhode Island still doing policy analysis for Rhode Island Kids Count. Has gotten really a lot of opportunities to try to influence policy and analyses regarding, adolescent children's teens health. Then my friend Isabel Blaylock, she's currently working for NARAL, doing reproductive health advocacy, directing some of their efforts in the Baltimore, Maryland area. So again, and then obviously me, like the sellout. So obviously with that, everyone's kind of applying different concepts from public health in a very concentrated way, right? So I think right off the bat, it's kind of hard to see those paths in a way because public health is so broad. But as you start to really anchor down to, one or two aspects of the things that you've been studying, I'm sure all of you have had some sort of insight into, community housing or even pharmaceuticals or policy or reproductive health. So you have a pretty broad base of options, and it's really just about segmenting down to, you know, what you really want to be doing on the day-to-day to be able to find those career opportunities. And I think all four of us are pretty good examples of, you know, same education, but, you know, anchoring down to different elements.
So yeah, I would definitely echo what Alex is saying. I think that with a public health degree, you can sell yourself with pretty much a wide range of different options. I think for me, particularly because I took so many data analysis classes, I think I can kind of like segue into that if I wanted to. I've heard of folks in not necessarily my year group, but the year before, who have gone into even like some kind of like more policy or even politics in terms of like not working necessarily with health data, but working with like population data and looking at that to drive policies. I know quite a few people who went on to maybe get a PhD into something like a DRPH, I think it is, where that's a little bit more of a practical PhD where you're not necessarily in academia, but you're managing a hospital, for instance. So those are some of the options. But I think with the public health degree, the emphasis should be on the skill set that you've learned while you're completing your MPH, and then how you can apply that in whatever setting. So whether it be pharmaceuticals or in consulting, like some of the panelists on here, or even more on the project coordinator side, which is what I'm working on. So it sounds corny and cheesy to say the possibilities are endless, but it's really how you sell yourself and how you sell your skill set. I think it's what really will get you through the door.
Great, thanks to you both. Definitely helpful for me too to understand what are the vast career options as somebody new to career advising myself. So a question that was also asked by a couple of people is, in addition to an MPH or like a Master's of Science, what other graduate programs have your peers gone on to that are maybe more business related, policy related, outside of public health, maybe not a DRPH? Do you have any peers who have gone on to other graduate programs? So Charden and Khalil.
I actually do not that I can think of off the top of my head. So my sister is actually also Brown Public Health, School of Public Health graduate. She got her MPH from Brown, and she actually went on to do the DRPH route. As Chantal mentioned, we were actually classmates. Some of our peers did go on to do the PhD, but I can't think of any right now who did anything else, unfortunately. I'm sorry. But yeah, I'm sorry. I think that's probably the best I can answer that question. I'm sorry.
No, I think it's great. I think it's also helpful for those who are maybe undergraduates right now. An MPH is theoretically a terminal degree, right? Like you don't need to go beyond an MPH unless you're interested in going into something more research focused, et cetera. But
exactly.
Go back to Khalil next. Thanks, Charden.
I'd have the same answer. I mean, as you said, it's, I think of a master's as a terminal degree, or it takes you to a PhD kind of program. So I think in my case, if you do a master's in biostatistics, then you want to pursue a PhD later, it would either be in epidemiology or biostatistics. So you kind of want to stay in the same field. Although with this kind of degree, you really have a lot of options in terms of careers. So
perfect, thank you. So we'll move on to our next question. When did you start applying for jobs? School just started very recently. And so for two panelists who want to kind of raise their hands to share, when did you start applying for post-grad jobs?
So I started applying the second year of my program, I would say in October, and I only got my job in May of the next year. I
had a similar experience. I'm a bit of a nervous person. So I started super, super early. Like I was I went to the career center, I remember, and they were teaching us about like stalking people's LinkedIn profile. And I want to say I started that like in September, which was really, really odd because that was like the second year, first semester. And so yeah, so I did that. I wouldn't recommend it because that might be a little bit too soon. But that's how soon I started with just kind of like seeing what's out there, what other people are doing, like looking at their resumes, because that's the beauty about LinkedIn, that it shows your resume so you can see like what they did to get there. So yeah, I started, I think, that September, and I landed my first job outside of my MPH that following June.
I feel like I want to also answer this question, even though I wasn't asked to, because like consulting is different in Charden. I don't know if you want to also add any information for like your consulting timeline, but
Yeah.
consulting interviews start pretty early. So whereas a lot of other positions might wait till like around graduation time to, actually get you into the door for like an interview, like a lot of people just screen you out if you're not able to start within a month, 2 months. Consulting will start really early, like around the fall, where the timelines often will go where they'll have you do one screen in early fall, another screen in like October, November, and then bring you in for a super day or a final round. I mean, I don't know what it's going to be like under COVID, but they'll probably bring you in for your final round around anywhere from December, January, February, and then for your positions to start around like July, September-ish. So that's just one timeline to be aggressive about. And Chantal's right. Like, I think that a lot of advice is for people to kind of ask you in advance on LinkedIn to like get in touch with me. And I know Barry Chu, I know you're attending this. I looked at the attendee list, and I know you did that to me even before you started the MPH. And I was very happy to meet with Barry. So I would just recommend that you don't feel like you're bothering me, or I don't want to volunteer all the rest of my panelists, but I have been happy to have done that with Barry. Sorry to embarrass you, Barry, but just keep that in mind if you really are curious.
Yeah, so like Chantal, I also started very early. Like she said, school started in September. I started shortly after September probably, and that final semester got seriously aggressively was aggressively looking. And I didn't land my consulting job until October. So not that long after graduation. And luckily for me, my sister, who I mentioned earlier, was actually working part-time with that consulting firm. And so that's sort of how I got onto the firm, luckily. So yeah, it was a interesting road though, definitely. So please reach out if you have any questions. Like Alex said, I'm happy to help.
Great, thanks everyone. I'm going to jump into one of our Q&A questions, and so I'm breaking my own plan, but I think it's a helpful question. So if you could explain the balance between how much you felt you had to know before you entered the job market to prepare for your job versus how much you were able to learn on the job, how would you kind of explain that? And again, whoever wants to answer it, go for it. I think it's a small enough panel.
I would say, I would venture out to say, I think most jobs do train you before you actually start. So I think, I think a lot of times we can put pressure on ourselves to know, X, Y, and Z. But I think obviously, getting a degree from Brown, you will be in a very nice position. And I just think, just going in there, knowing what you know, you will be trained and you'll be fine. I think the jobs will definitely train you on what you'll be doing and what their expectation of you is.
Great, thank you. So maybe the next question, one MPH alum, and maybe Khalil, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, what courses did you take while you were a student that were most relevant to your current job? And so that's for maybe students who are considering which classes should I take as a recommendation.
So for me, I took practical data analyses at the School of Public Health. In the 2 years, for me, I took the PhD classes. A lot of them were very, very theoretical and kind of useless for my job. But I would say the very applied classes, like regression classes, practical data analyses was one of the most useful for me. And so, for example, it's one of the classes that we had homework solutions that had R code. So I'm still going back to that and using it when I'm doing, modeling. Yeah, I feel like that was very helpful.
And maybe an MPH alum, favorite classes or classes that were most relevant in your current role?
I took health policy challenges with Marty. I believe her last name was Rosenberg. I really, really, really enjoyed that class. I would encourage whomever maybe out there who's interested in policy to take that course if it's still being offered. I'm sure it is. And yeah, I would say that one probably helped me the most. I don't use it every day in the way that the class was taught, but it was certainly still helpful, and still helped shape where I want to take my career.
I think one of my favorite classes was Epi Infectious Disease. I think that's taught by Brendan Marshall. And it's not so much that I knew that I wanted to be an infectious disease epidemiologist, but I thought of how he was able to take the kind of like the foundation that I learned with the intro Epi classes and the Biostatistics class that I took and apply it to a public health issue. I think that was helpful because even though I'm not specifically in that field, I can take bits and pieces of what he did and apply it to the work that I'm currently doing right now.
I guess if I want to also just maybe add like a contradictory perspective to everyone. I think that like classes, thinking about what classes you can take in order to advance your career prospects is good, but I also would recommend thinking a lot about how you can do things outside of just your coursework to be able to be more aggressively competitive. So I think that it was really great to be able to take courses with like Teresa Shireman, who I really love, in the HSR department on pharmacoepi and pharmaceutical economics. But I think that the thing that got me through a lot of the initial resume screens and through the interviews to be able to talk about were things that I did on the academic side, like publishing papers or doing certain internships. So I think that you should definitely do courses and prepare that way. But I would also, not just think about courses as the only way to try to, or not even just the only way, but also as a supplementary way to also think about what you could be doing outside the classroom to be able to make yourself competitive, especially if you're applying for something competitive like consulting.
Thanks so much. That's great advice to give for sure, to balance out your kind of academic experience while at Brown. So I have a question specifically for Alex. What helped you decide you wanted to work towards an MPH degree while completing your undergraduate degree? So this is for anyone considering an AB-MPH program. And the kind of addition to that is especially considering the tuition for the combined program. If you could enlighten us on your perspective.
Yeah, so actually I can also talk to you about the advantages. So I actually haven't really talked about this much with a lot of folks, but I actually also applied out in my senior year to one-year programs with like an MPhil or MSc in the UK. And was, again, at the end of the day, like when I was graduating with my senior year, I was pretty much destined to go for a graduate degree because I am on like the PhD-ish path and taking a few years off from that to do consulting. But really was between like going to like the UK and doing that or staying at Brown too. So I think that the thing that kept me at Brown and reason why I did it for like just initially was I think that being able to get access to the graduate level like resources, like do the coursework, be able to start working towards some of the hard skills that you can get out of some of the MPH classes. So the jump up from like 850 to 2120, the jump up from like the R analysis with Rowie up to like we're doing the stuff with like Crystal Linkletter and Annie Elsvik, being able to actually get like the hard skills and being able to generate academic publications from a really early stage. So as soon as like my junior year, which is when I started taking those graduate courses, was really the big draw for me, especially because I knew I was going to probably end up in academia anyway. The reason why I stayed at Brown versus going to another program, even after having that experience and being there for 2 years, is that I think that the big struggle with a lot of MPH programs and a lot of my friends who came into the program as an MPH student was just that it takes us some time to be able to get your feet wet and be able to, acclimate to the program. And that's just because obviously if you're in a new setting generally, like that's just always going to be true. You're taking your first semester to not even only like move away to a new place and figure out what's going on in the city, but also to be able to handle the coursework and expectations and just, Brown and SPH culture stuff too. So the one advantage that I had and why I stayed on to the MPH program in the 5th year for Brown was because I had already had that acclimation period, as a, freshman, sophomore, and could just directly jump off of that in order to make the most, I think, out of my MPH year. So I know Sean had dropped, the 20 publications thing. And that's really, when I was in my senior year, I only really had like 2 or 3 or 4 published at that time. And it's really only in that MPH year that I was really able to really get it. I mean, it's just a ridiculous amount for no reason at all. But it's really just being able to take advantage of that extra year where I knew all my faculty for like the past 2 years, knew every single grant that was available to undergrad/grad students all at the same time, to then be able to move off of that. The tuition stuff, like obviously like that's a big consideration, and that's something that anyone, if you're making an educated decision to go and to get another degree, like that's always just gonna be part of the equation. And I think that's something that you should keep in mind. But for me, I think that the extra tuition I was gonna have to pay extra tuition regardless of where I was gonna go, because I wanted to get a master's degree before I did a PhD program, and it was a question of whether it was gonna be at Brown or whether it was gonna be another 2 years at another US-based school, or whether it was gonna be paid to some UK-based institution. So, I mean, I think for me, like, the choice wasn't necessarily like tuition or no tuition. It was really like, all right, I think like the 1 year is actually kind of like a discount in a way, because I was still getting undergrad financial aid in senior year rather than just paying for 2 extra years of my MPH program. So I realized that was answering a lot of questions all at once. But I think that's probably the overarching view and like the narrative that answers, I think, all the elements of that question.
Thanks so much. For everyone else, did anyone take a kind of gap between graduating from undergrad and going into the graduate program? And was there a reason that you did that in particular? Like, what was your motivation for pursuing a master's degree? You know, working first versus going right into grad school. I think that might be helpful for some of our undergrad participants.
Yeah, I think, so when I graduated from my undergrad, I had a biology degree and I was on a different path. My first job out of undergrad was actually with Campbell Soup. I was a lab technician. So I was doing wet science lab. And then I realized after that I never wanted to do that ever again in my life. So I then kind of like pivoted into public health. I was working with the Connecticut Department of Health as with their WIC program. And then I realized that if I wanted to pursue public health, then a biology degree might not be the right fit. So I decided to jump into my MPH. So I did take some time off between that. And then of course, when you take that break, cost is a factor. You're wondering, okay, I'm giving up an income to be a student with no income. So I did have to wrestle with that. And fortunately enough, I had the opportunity to do that and not go, completely starve. So that was good.
Great, thank you for that insight. So a couple more questions, and feel free to ask in the Q&A section for folks who are attending. I'll go to another question. What was the most helpful resource during your job search? So we're talking post-grad job search, not necessarily internship. We'll get to internship next for MPH students. But what would you say is the most helpful resource, like networking, listservs, Handshake, etc., job boards? Whoever wants to answer, if you just want to dive in, I welcome your answer. Or what do you wish you had that you didn't have?
So I would certainly say, sites like Indeed. If you're someone who's interested in policy, there's a website called Daybook. If I'm not mistaken, they list policy jobs every day, and you can get emails every day. I would say LinkedIn is a huge resource. You can actually, as Chantal mentioned earlier, you can actually see what people have done, how they have gotten to where they are now, and you can actually reach out to them. I would also say trying to make sure where possible in your resume, quantify what you've done, sort of quantify the impact that you've made. So let each bullet point really speak for itself, where possible, try to quantify. And for example, what I mean by that is, let's say you worked on a project where you, helped your state save money, right? Put that in that bullet. So, it rounds it off and quantifies and really shows the impact of what you've done. That's what I would say.
Sean, I'll add to that in terms of resources. I very much agree that LinkedIn is a great one. That's what I was using. That's the main platform I was using when looking for jobs. And also reach out to your alumni. So look up in LinkedIn, just type, for me, I was doing Brown Biostatistics, and then looking them up and messaging them, asking them if they had any vacancies in their company.
I would also echo that. I remember one of the counselors at the Career Center told me that everyone likes to talk about themselves. So if you reach out to someone on LinkedIn and just a short introduction and just say, hey, can we talk? they will almost never turn you down, and then just let them rip, just let them just keep going. Another thing that I found was useful was my internships. So I was fortunate enough to intern at the Department of Health. And while I was there, I worked the whole room. Like, I made sure that I had connections and I talked with people, I asked questions. And I think building those in-person connections, especially because I think Brown is so well tied to not only the Department of Health, but so many other companies, especially like public policy companies, that it's easy to get an introduction. And it took work because I'm fairly shy. I don't like to be the center of attention. It took some work, but I found that by building those connections within my internships, I was able to get a referral, or even just like a heads up that, hey, this department is hiring, you should consider applying. And I thought those hints were very helpful. So I would recommend that, in addition to the LinkedIn and the LinkedIn stalking and the alumni networking.
Just wanted to comment one last thing, very specific to consulting. I feel like a lot of people who want to do consulting end up like trying to memorize like these 3 books, like Cracking the Case Interview, and like try to memorize like a billion frameworks that they can then apply to things. Like, don't do that. It's going to be a major waste of your time if you're just trying to commit like a billion books to memory, because really what case interviews very specifically are not meant to test like your memorization skills. It's really meant to test like your thinking processes. So just, I think that you should probably talk to, like, similar to, I guess, like re-emphasize the point of LinkedIn stalking. Like, you really want to be able to talk to people who are alums who are working at companies that you might be interviewing at, just to be able to like get a sense of what their day-to-day is. And the information about like what their day-to-day is can help inform like how you should be preparing for like a potential case they might give you, way more than just trying to like memorize some book that like every single like undergrad who's like was willing to like stab their mom to get into like McKinsey, like to try to get a job there, like is trying to do. Like, don't do that to yourself. It's really just gonna waste like a good part of your grad year.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your insight. I think that it's outside of the academic experience. It's like, that's foundational. It's a lot of soft skills and networking that seem like they've really helped all of you in the career search process. So thanks for sharing. A couple of consulting focused questions from our Q&A. If you don't mind, Alex and Charden answering these. First question is, in what way does your public health background and education help you in consulting? And then we'll go to the next question afterwards.
So for me, what I do day to day is not really clearly linked to public health. So I can't really say, but it has certainly been helpful when, focusing on some of like the hospitals and, what they do and what they need. That has been helpful. But, I don't use any epi or biostats in my day-to-day work. So I don't know, that may or may not answer your question. Alex may be better equipped to answer your question.
Yeah, besides an acute sense of what increasing the price of pharmaceutical drugs does, I would say that the biggest thing is, I do come in, like, so I work in life sciences consulting. So it involves a lot of cases where, pharma company wants to know how to launch a drug at a certain price, or which indications they should be pursuing, or, whether or not a certain rare disease is worth actually entering into. All that seems like a commercial question, but really fundamentally is an epidemiological and policy question, right? Because it involves a question of how many patients do you actually have, what therapies are currently available, how hard is it going to be to actually be able to generate a clinical trial that like can meet the goals or has the endpoints that payers across the EU or the US are really, I mean, the FDA is, kind of a pushover is kind of the big thing. But I've worked on global projects where we've worked with European payers and they have certain evidence requirements and, patient reported outcomes that they're really expected to be included in trials. I can go on and on and on, but really, even though this is seems like a big commercial question, and they are commercial questions, right? At the end of the day, you have to give a price recommendation, or like go with this indication over this, or go with this agent over this. At the end, really all of it requires you to fundamentally understand, some of the basic stuff that underpins public health and epidemiology and biostat, right? So and also just be able to like understand like HER evidence or where the gaps in evidence are, right? Like it also means something if you try to find pieces of information, but you just can't find it, right? And that happens a lot, I think, too, where we'll search for, economic analyses of, how much cancer drugs have been able to have cost offsets and not be able to find it. And knowing that you've exhausted like, your PubMed searches, your searches for other data sources across, HTA outcomes in the EU, stuff like that, being able to know that you've done your homework to the best of your ability and just not out there, like being able to know where the gaps in your knowledge are too is something that's really helpful. So I don't want to contradict the earlier answer, which is like, do you get trained on the job? Like the answer is yes. Like I didn't enter pharmaceutical consulting knowing how everything in public health or my MPH degree or my stuff I learned in my AB, like actually really applied to consulting. But it's one of those things where if you don't have to develop like the understanding of what censoring is and survival analysis, it's something where you're able to get things a little bit quicker. And again, with consulting hours and the reputation that consulting has of working, to meet client demands late at night, the little bit more that you're able to understand, like why it's good, what a case fatality rate is without having to look it up, is something that will save you some time and will actually also help you, I think, be able to use your projects to actually advance knowledge that you can then take back to your public health background, like I've been really lucky to be able to do in a lot more educated ways. So I do think that it helps you also extract information and learnings from consulting a little bit more when you're able to actually know what's going on in the environment.
Great, thank you both. So one more consulting question for a first-year MPH student thinking about summer internships. What advice do you have for applying for consulting-specific internships for this upcoming summer?
I did not have a consulting internship, but this is what I probably would have done if I were searching for one. As we've all said, I would definitely use LinkedIn. But before going to LinkedIn, I would first try to figure out what type of consulting you're interested in. Identify those consulting firms, and then go to LinkedIn and try to establish some sort of contact with any people that you may find. But I think the first thing would be to try to figure out what type of consulting you're interested in and what you want to do, and then go use LinkedIn to your advantage.
I'm going to give you like the insider soft tips because I've been involved in, I think, like the choice sets here. So I think the understated thing about just how qualified or smart people are, and I think that's like a lot of things that people who are preparing for consulting interviews, they're like, I need to know what the case interview is and like how to do that and be like achieve that and like be the smartest person ever to be able to achieve that. And I think that ignores a lot of the actual just very like soft skills, the ability to actually come off as like a good fit, like someone that people would want to hang out with and go to a happy hour with. That's a big element of consulting. And honestly, like you all are probably pretty smart. Like you all probably could ace a consulting interview. It's not like the hardest thing to do, like multiplication and think about, we probably have to care about the policymakers and the patients and the HCPs, et cetera, like, right. Like, and the insurance plans, like that's not the hardest thing in the world. What is important, and I think that is an element that people don't realize as much, is like you want to have good fit within a company. So it's being able to be really smart, but also not like being overtly like an attack dog that people will not be able to work with and won't enjoy like having around. But also I think, and this is like a really understated element, but internships are also investments in being able to get people to come back and also like work there for a decent amount of time. And a lot of firms are going to want their students to come back and like actually like work in the company and like also advance throughout the company. So like try your best not to be like, oh yeah, I'm using my internship as a stepping stone to get a PhD, or like I'm using it because I'm pre-med and I really want to know about pharma right before I go to med school, like right a year after. Like that's not, if you're like just rational thinking, this is not like an insider thinking, but like let's just like think about like the rational investment stuff. Like if you know someone's going to dip after a year, that's probably not a really great investment with a limited amount of internships that you can offer, and like investing time in like an intern who obviously is going to take some time to acclimate and is going to need some time in coaching to be able to like actually be useful as like a project analyst or an introductory consultant. So I'm not advocating for like lying or like deceiving people, but like also just be aware of when you're doing one of these internships and these sets of interviews that you're going to want to be able to, again, like, because again, like you might take a couple of years off from doing a PhD or being, an MD or whatever, right? Or doing a DRPH. So you want to keep that in mind when you're, again, realizing that they have a very particular set of rational incentives too, And you probably don't want to undercut yourself on any of them, including both the fit part and the idea that the internship's an investment. So again, these are Charden's exactly right, and like you should be leveraging those resources. But this is also part of the, I think, like the other stuff that goes behind the scenes that I often think that people who are interested in consulting just don't think about, because they're like so fixated on being qualified through an interview process or a resume that they ignore some of the other very rational things that people think about when they're going to offer them an internship in a competitive field.
Great, thank you both. Question for Khalil. Working at CVS, a lot of students in biostatistics tend to go and work in industry rather than academia, or there's a good mix. Can you explain what your motivations were for pursuing your role at CVS Aetna, and how did you get that job? CVS is headquartered in Rhode Island, but I know it was Aetna was recently acquired by CVS, if I'm not mistaken. So I'd love to hear about your path and how you got there.
So I applied through LinkedIn, and at the time, I think Aetna was still advertised as a separate entity online. So I applied on LinkedIn, and then they reached out to me. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Sure. Just interested to hear about your motivations for pursuing a career at CVS.
So in biostats, I guess you have lots of options in terms of industry. So you don't necessarily have to go, the pharma route. You can work for pretty much any company. You can work for Google, Facebook, whatever. And my background is a little bit complicated. I worked in banking for a while, and I was very disappointed with my day-to-day job. I wanted something that was a little bit more meaningful in terms of how I can impact the world. What we do at CVS Aetna is really using data to try to improve our members' health, because it's a win-win situation. So if you think of healthcare benefits company, we do gain from our members being healthier, because that's how we save money. And I think that was really my, part of my decision process when I was thinking about different jobs and different companies. That's really what weighted in my choice, meaning how can I do data science while making the world a better place in some sense.
Great, thank you. Question for Chantal. At the Rhode Island Department of Health, via the CDC Foundation, could you kind of elaborate on what that relationship is and how that kind of organization works? Because I see a lot of opportunities at CDC Foundation, and it's a partner with Rhode Island Department of Health, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm going to try to do this and try not to like botch the relationship. But from what I understand, so the CDC Foundation is it has a strong tie to the CDC, where they have funding that's provided by the CDC that they've then returned to local Department of Health to help with whatever issues. So at the time, I was working at the foundation, but I was stationed at the Department of Health in Rhode Island to work on opioid, because there was an opioid epidemic. So right now, with what's going on with COVID, there's a lot of positions that are focused on that. So they help to kind of like bolster the resources or the human resources that are at the local health department to tackle some of these issues that are beyond kind of like the scope of their current workload. So I was working on the opioid overdose team at the time. So this was 2019, so last year into this year. And I was doing data analysis. So I was an epi. So it's not as hardcore as Khalil, but it's still baby data analysis and more public health focused. So we used a lot of like local Rhode Island health data and some mapping features in order to kind of like get a sense of the landscape of opioid overdose. That was a common terminology that they used, and just some of the things that could be done to respond if we saw a spike, for instance.
Thanks so much. So we still have about 12 minutes until our wonderful panel is over. So if you have any questions, please submit them now. But just a couple more questions that were pre-submitted. What do you know now that you wish you knew in the job search process, other than making sure you use LinkedIn as a primary tool? And anyone's welcome to answer this question.
I think for me is to never take job interviews personal. As I said, I started really early in the game. So that also means that I interviewed and applied to a lot of companies. And I felt that I was an excellent fit, not because I think I'm a super genius person, but I was like, wait a minute, I'm recent, so I'm cheap. I'm a recent grad, so I'm cheap, and I can do the work while you're not hiring me. And then I realized that it's like a number game. You can send out 100 applications and hear back from 10, interview with maybe 5, get a second interview with 2, and that's just unfortunately the name of the game. So don't take it too personal if you get a rejection or if you don't hear back at all. Companies are rude like that. They will not send you an email, and that's just what it is.
I think I want to echo what Alex said earlier about being the right fit. So sometimes you do have all the qualifications like on paper, but then when you meet with the team, it's just you're not the right fit, and it's just like that, you know. So try maybe working on all, you know, the behavioral questions, and be aware like how you present yourself. I know it's very difficult to kind of know what they expect from you in terms of behavioral questions, but some companies do have clear values that you kind of have to fit, like Amazon. So maybe do your research and make sure you present yourself as potentially a good fit for the company.
I think there's 2 big things. So first off, like I want to echo like Chantal's point. Like I also flubbed like 6 final rounds before I actually got like an offer. So like you can really you're going to take a lot of L's, and then you just got to be okay with that. Because if you think you're going to submit like 1 or 2 apps and like get something, like you're probably not setting yourself up for the healthiest mental health stuff that are going to come with this job process. The other big thing, and I think this is just a good general tip, is that your job isn't who you are as a person. And I think that that's kind of a hard thing that people have, because like you're in public health, you're like, I want to make a difference and like I want to be great. And like, while that is true, you obviously want to be doing something that is not going to make you actively miserable or like, you know, sap your soul from your body like every day, right? But at the end of the day, like any job is just a job. Like your professors who are doing things to improve people's health, like that's a job for them. They walk into SPH at 1:21, or they used to, and then they walk out at the end of the day. They shut off their computers and they don't do work. Like every single thing that you're doing for under like, you know, capitalism for money, like is just a job, right? And it's not like you define yourself by that. So I think a corollary to this also is obviously like do something that's going to make you happy, but it's not like you have to, like, it's not part of your grand narrative that you're going to fix the world if you take like if you have to take a research coordinator position. Oh no, like instead of like going straight to a PhD or not getting like some consultancy or whatever, like at the end of the day, like you have many, many years to go do some work and hopefully do meaningful work at the end of it. But also you want to be able to find like your pockets of sanity away from the job search, and also like just to be able to start off like a very healthy adult life to fill your time besides just thinking about pharma or health policy or like what research papers you're going to do on the day-to-day, because you're just going to end up burning yourself out. And I think that switch from just like a student, like, oh, I'm going to dedicate my life to this field, and then like making that switch to a job is something that is like an incredibly like subtle leap, but is ultimately one of the ones that will determine like how healthy you can be in relation to your job. You like, again, like I think that big switch for me, at least mentally, even if I'm working like a 50-60, I mean, I work 50-hour weeks, like even if I work like a 60-hour week, it's the one thing like where like if I can carve out some time to do something that actually like fulfills me as a human being, like just makes it easier to deal with rather than me like pegging my life to like my like the work that I'm doing in consulting. Because I think that a lot of people make that mistake when they make the switch from being a student and being at a school like Brown. Obviously you guys are smart, but like don't think that you have to always take that attitude into a job too. Like having a healthy separation is really important.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, if everyone has one last kind of bit of advice, philosophical or tactical in nature, totally welcome. Love it.
I'll just jump in and say 2 quick things. One is, you know, finding your dream job, finding, even if it's not your dream job, you know, just that next step, it's probably going to take some time, and that's okay. I'm sure a lot of you are high achievers and you're used to just sort of knocking the pins down, if you want to follow my bowling analogy. That was my experience. And it will take time, but like Alex said, that's not necessarily, it's just a job. It's not necessarily a reflection of you. 2, I would say, be open to other things. So if you're not really finding a job, consider fellowships, consider other things that will be meaningful to put you on the path to where you want to be. Even if it's, volunteering, if it's anything that can get you along the path to where you want to go, I would definitely say consider doing that, because it will put you on that path. So I think that's useful.
I think my advice would be very patient and take the interviews as an opportunity to improve yourself for the next interviews. So don't put too much weight on yourself thinking, oh, I really want this one, or I want this job. But think about, okay, if this doesn't work, this will prepare me for the next one. And that will keep your motivation up. And eventually you will find the one that really works for you, and you'll be happy, and even happier that you didn't actually end up getting the job that you were interviewed for before.
All right, so I just want to thank you all, unless there are any last tips or tricks that anyone wants to share before we end our webinar, but thank you so much. This has been super enlightening for me, and I'm positive for everyone who participated today. So on behalf of the School of Public Health at Brown and our new Office of Career Advising, which is myself, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and energy, and your perspectives have been extremely helpful. So thank you very much, and hope everyone has a wonderful evening or morning, depending on what time zone you're in.